Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Canadian Story. Very pleased to have my good friend from my hometown of Red Deer, area. I guess I'm not from Red Deer, and he's not either, but we both have spent a lot of time in Red Deer, and he lives in Red Deer now. Denton, welcome to the show. Why don't you share a little bit about yourself with the listeners?
Well, thanks for having me, David. I grew up outside of Red Deer by Pinoka on a cow-calf operation. And I've lived in Red Deer ever since college, last 12 years, I guess. And I trade futures and commodities and currencies, and have been doing that for like 7-8 years now.
Yeah, and you've kind of made a life for yourself completely independent of the normal, way of people get a job and stuff.
Yeah, it's not the average go to school 9 to 5.
No, and also you're completely independent essentially. Except for your investors.
I basically work for myself.
Yeah. So you're a lover of markets. You're a lover of freedom. You've been heavily involved in the libertarian movement in Canada for many years. I'd like to hear what, I know that this may be harder for you also as an Albertan, but what is something you love about Canada, and what would you like to see preserved here?
I think Canada's a good country. I know you probably think I don't like Canada.
Well, you're constantly bashing it in the chat, but
no, Canada's a good country. One of the best places to live in the world. I think we do a lot of things wrong, as do you, and I'm sure the vast majority of your listeners. But we still have the freedom in this country to pursue our own ends and make a life for ourselves that in 75% of the world you don't have.
Yeah.
And I think we should be appreciative of that and have gratitude towards that, instead of just whining and wanting to burn down the system, which is something I've been felt strongly about for a few years now, because when you're younger, you just see the bad in everything. And we need to have more gratitude for what we do have, and then come up with ways to fix it.
Oh, I like that a lot. And it's true. Like, that is something we've kind of heard throughout the podcast, Zach, is that people love the opportunity that's here. So why don't you share a little bit about free markets, what draws you to them? Like, I want to hear, this is going to be a philosophic episode, because that's what you and I talk about all the time.
We do this a lot offline.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, from our side, from the conservative side, we hear a lot about free markets, but the practicality of them, about how they create this vast collective wealth, which is all true, and they basically save lives, which we've seen with the COVID vaccine. That is because of the free markets. But we don't hear about like the cultural or the moral case for capitalism.
No, almost never.
All we talk about is that it creates jobs and creates wealth, and we should talk about that. But it also, the reason we have free markets is more of that it's your freedom, like we were just talking about, to pursue your own ends in life, and that your life matters to pursue your own happiness. You're not living for the state like you are in China. Like, China does have a high degree of economic freedom compared to what they did have, but in China, you live for the Communist Party of China.
Yeah, that's the end, right? Like
that's the end, exactly. And the end here isn't, I'm not living for the Canadian government. You're not living for the Canadian government. You're living for David Parker. I'm living for Denton Wierzba. And we need to be more conscious of that, I think, of talking about that, instead of just saying we're in a battle with China for democracy. No, we're in a battle with China for freedom.
Yes. Go into that more. Yeah. So how does that battle look to you?
It's like, it's the purpose of the state is to protect our rights, and it needs to be there. I'm not an anarchist at all.
No.
But we get caught up, I think, in too much of talking about just that, this is what capitalism creates. We need balanced budgets so we don't go too much debt, instead of just saying, no, we need to have less state intervention in our lives because you matter, not the government.
So you and I and many of our other friends talk about this excessively, but we kind of had Canada have a bit of a culture of conformity and going along to get along and keeping the big guys down. What do you think it is about Canada? Like these are negative things, but they're things that we think we can change. What do you think it is about our culture that kind of produces that ethos?
Like you're talking like tall poppy syndrome?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't think it's just, I think in certain parts of Canada it's worse, but I don't think it's just a Canadian thing. Like as much as I think America's a great country, you see that in America too.
Right.
That everyone wants to chop the big guy down. And it's almost seems like it's more of a rural problem. And I say this as someone from a rural area.
Yep.
That you hear this saying all the time, like you're too big for your britches. Which
right. That's true.
Hate that. I just hate that so much. It's like why is it any of your business if someone's making it big? You should maybe not feel happy for them, but at least not feel any contempt towards them.
Right.
Is my view of it. And I don't know what else to.
But what do you think it is about? Do you think it's that people are kind of disappointed in their own lives, and when they see someone else doing well,
it's definitely a jealousy thing.
Yeah,
and I think social media has made it worse because now it's broadcasted.
Yeah,
so now you see it everywhere, and it pisses people off.
It's in your face, and then
in your face.
Of course, I guess the one other side of this is like there's bragging about things and throwing it in people's faces, like. Why?
That's just bad manners. No one should be doing that.
Yeah, right.
But at the same time, you shouldn't want to tear them down because of it.
No. Yeah. But it's interesting that does seem to be the de facto, right? If someone's like kind of even celebrating their wins, other people will be like, "Oh, you suck. Why are you celebrating your wins?" Like, I mean, I do that a lot, and I think that I have a bit of a reputation. I mean, in fact, I have the David Parker
all get used
humble
to it
brag.
with you, though,
David. But I just find it, like, on a cultural level, interesting that Canadians tend to be more focused on equality than Americans, let's say, if we're just using that comparison. And by de facto, we actually do have more wealth equality, but we also seem to only build to a certain point, and then it moves to the States or it gets sold off or something. What do you think it is about Canada that allows that to happen from a market perspective? Like, why don't we have any Googles or Amazons or even, I don't know, like where are?
I think it's a couple reasons. First, I think it's just this, and this is the worst part about Canada. I think is this weird obsession with being different than America.
Right. Yeah.
So we're kindler and we're gentler, and we got to play that up. And there's this moral preening about it, and I think that's destructive to the culture. So I think that's the first and probably most important part about why we don't have the Amazons or the Apples or the Googles. And then the second part is, and I think this is underrated as well, I think the US legal system and their institutions are just way stronger than ours. And There's more protection for IP law and everything down there, and lower tax rates. That has something to do with it as well. All the differences have converged. And less of a regulatory burden. So it would be those. It would be culture and institutions, I'd say.
Right, and the So what is it about the American institutions that you like as compared to the Canadian institutions? Like, can you give us a few examples?
Yeah, well, there's people romanticize the U.S. Constitution a lot, and I think for good reason. But it's also just a fabulous legal document that it protects rights, and it has this legal system backing it up. And it creates certainty. Right. I think that's probably the best thing about the U.S. Constitution is that it creates certainty, so that these Amazons and these Googles are able to grow, and then plus their financial sector.
Right.
They have a way more entrepreneurial financial sector where they find innovative ways to get these companies funding. Like they have the VC community and multiple banks. We just have 5 banks here.
Right.
All based in Toronto. And they have private equity firms and hedge funds. It's really amazing when you think about the financial ecosystem of the US. And I think that's probably why they are so much more productive than we are. The number one reason.
So this is going to be a very good part of our conversation. The financial sector. Obviously, you and I don't entirely agree, and I want to have this debate because I feel like my listeners don't really understand it. Maybe I don't understand it fully. You've been studying this for the last decade of your life. You have a very good handle on this. On this show earlier in the year, we had Andre on to talk about GME and hedge funds and like the little guy being screwed. You don't agree with that perspective. You even wrote an article in the Western Standard going after that, putting together a different view. So why don't you share your view with listeners? Because, you know, part of the Canadian story is debate and having different perspectives. So,
well, first I'd like to ask you, why do you think hedge funds are to blame in the GME thing and going after them?
Well, I more think that the issue isn't that the hedge funds as an institution are to blame. I think it's the institutionalization of like the desire to profit off the destruction of a company. And you and I've argued about this before, is like whether shorting is a moral thing. And I think that the reason that they got caught with their pants down and continue to is because they got really greedy and saw this as just an opportunity to make a lot of money very quickly as they destroyed another American company. And whereas Ryan Cohen comes along and he says, no, actually, like I see a lot of value in the underlying legacy infrastructure that you have, including your lists, and then we're just in the middle of a short squeeze, right? Where basically if they're not going to die, then and actually I'd like you to explain this to the listeners, because I think you understand this way better than anyone else I know. Explain how shorting works first, and then we can go into the discussion about it.
Yeah, I'll explain shorting, then I'll respond to what you said. Well, when you're shorting just a single stock, like you would be GameStop, you got to borrow those shares from someone. Usually from your broker will have shares for you to borrow, and then you sell into the market. So you're paying a borrowing cost too. Sometimes it's large, like on what was that? Like on Beyond Meat when it went went public and people were shorting it, like the borrowing costs were insane. It was like annualized at like 400 or 500%, I think. just because
everyone wanted to short.
Interest in it was so high to short. And so you got to borrow it and then you sell it back into the market. And then to cover, you got to buy those shares back. So as what happened in GameStop, those guys got way too over their skis. It was a horrible trade.
Yep.
And they took a beating for it, rightfully so. Like that's part of the game.
Yeah,
they're grown-ups. And so that's how shorting works. And then to answer your question, to respond to you, I guess, is that they had a case for shorting GameStop. They thought it was a dying industry.
Right.
That wasn't just them publishing a bunch of garbage research trying to drive the stock down. These guys all had a case for it. They probably all talked to each other, which they then had groupthink.
Right.
And they filed in the same position. And like, what was it, 160% of the float?
Over 100. I think at one point it was over 200% of the float.
Yeah, which I think that was like an issue with derivatives.
Yes, yeah.
It became. And then they got squeezed. And that's been happening since. There's been trading on Wall Street since the 1860s when Cornelius Vanderbilt and Jay Gould were battling over the Erie Railroad Company.
Right.
This has been happening since time begun in trading. And I don't think there was anything malicious in what any of those guys did with GME or with AMC or any of these other meme stocks. But yeah, it does happen sometimes. I think I'm not the biggest fan of Elon Musk, but I think some of the stuff with Tesla has been more of a witch hunt than it has been of them actually just wanting to profit off shorting the stock.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So
I would separate those two.
But so let's go into the moral case for shorting. Since you're making that case, you're saying there's nothing inherently wrong with shorting. So what is the value to the economy and to the market of shorting?
It keeps a two-sided market, first off. Because if everyone was just piling in long, the market would respond. I don't think shorting, like some people act like the market wouldn't exist without shorting. I'm not so sure about that, although I think it's necessary. but it creates two sides of the market. So you have it actually dampens volatility at the end of the day because you got people battling on both sides. Other people would make the case for shorting that they find fraudulent companies, which I'm less. I don't think it's as big a deal as others think. That they're finding fraud. I think fraud will be found anyways. It might be found quicker because of them. But I also think a lot of these guys who are in it to find fraud get on their moral high ground, and they do just as much damage as the people who do commit fraud, I think. Right.
So really the case is price discovery to a degree.
Yeah. Exactly. That's
price discovery and price stability. And price stability. So why don't inflation? I want to talk to you about inflation. Obviously, it's a huge topic of conversation right now. Everyone and their dog thinks that we're headed for hyperinflation. You spend a lot of time in this space paying attention to the prices of commodities. As you said, you're a commodities trader. What's your read on inflation, and how do you see that impacting both your business but also the future of the Canadian and maybe global economy?
Yeah, I'm less bullish on inflation than most. I still, because of debt and demographics, I still think we could have deflation. And I think the narrative around inflation is mostly centered around this revolution towards fiscal, and even that's mostly centered around the U.S., which I think they're hitting the Biden administration's hitting the headwind here. Just to say my political biases, I'm happy about it.
Right.
And they aren't going to be getting the big spending packages across the goal line that they were once thought to be. So that's going to hurt it. Plus, I said demographics. Plus, when you have as much debt as we do in the system, that's actually a drag on growth. It's not
right
because capital goes back towards paying off those debts. So you look at the past year since these COVID checks started coming in, a lot of money's gone towards paying down credit card debt.
Yeah.
So that's not increasing the velocity of money.
No, not at all. That money's disappearing
to increase inflation. And it's a regulatory thing too. With banks aren't loaning out as much capital as they used to be, and that's where a lot of money originates. It's like when the banks give out a loan. That's capital origination. That's money going into the system. And when you raise their capital requirements and make it tougher for them to lend, that's deflationary. It might be the most deflationary thing there is. So all those things combined, I think we're going to have some short-term inflation here. And a lot of it is from supply chain issues, like you see with semiconductors or lumber. But I don't think we're going to the 5, 6, 7% inflation that people think I think it's going to be a dud. And then I'm afraid of what happens after that, because then I think things could get really crazy if we disappoint here on inflation.
Right. Because people are all expecting it. So, go into that a little bit more. What do you think will happen? This is pure speculation at this point.
Yeah, pure speculation, obviously, but that's what the fun of it is.
Yeah, exactly. That's the fun of these discussions.
I don't know if your listeners have heard about modern monetary theory.
Some of them have. We've kind of discussed it once or twice. Yeah.
So
is that the same thing as quantitative easing, right?
No. Well, you could say they're cousins, I guess, but quantitative easing is just the central banks buying bonds. They are printing money when they do it, but modern monetary theory would basically be a sever between the fiscal and monetary policy. And I think if we do that fully, and then some people are like, we do have MMT already, which you could make the case for. And then there's the descriptive and the prescriptive end of MMT, which they are right on some of the descriptive.
Just for the listeners who don't know, do you want to give a quick summary of what it is, very basic?
Yeah. So basically their theory is, and they aren't exactly wrong in this, is that you can print as much money as you want, as long as inflation doesn't increase. The big thing doesn't. So they claim there's a gap between how much more we can spend and create more money, and what there is, and we aren't reaching it. So to give them their fair shot, they they could be right about that. But the thing is, what happens when you're wrong?
Yeah, right.
And there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. And then their fixes are what I find very scary, because then that's raising tax rates.
Yeah.
That's price control when they want to dampen inflation. And that would hurt the economy. That's the amount of government intervention in your life. Because right now, when you want to toggle with the monetary policy to fix inflation, it's interest rates.
Yeah.
That's it. And you start putting tax rates and regulatory policy into that. That's from my perspective and your perspective, that's a disaster.
That's massive deadweight loss. Yeah, that's deadweight loss too, right? Like as soon as you're adding regulation and taxation to control the monetary problem that you created, you're immediately introducing less freedom into the system. And,
exactly.
And not so that's the moral case, but then if we make just the raw economic case, any regulatory increase, any tax increase creates deadweight loss. This is just a well-known basic fact. Nobody argues that that's not true, right?
Yeah.
So now we're literally making the pie smaller.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
Everyone.
And then even then, how if you have all these spending promises, how are you going to pull them back?
Yeah.
There's a political problem here, because now you've made monetary policy 100% political.
Yeah, which it never should be. And that was actually Harper's whole thing, was that it shouldn't be.
That was the whole reason for having an independent central bank, is that they would be above politics, which they aren't right now.
No,
better than that.
Yes,
it's better than that.
Yes.
Talking about having gratitude for what you have, and even
right, we can be like, what we have is good. Let's keep these two things separated. Yeah. What do you think it is? Because it seems to be almost like a global consensus that's forming around this theory to some degree. What do you think is the driving force behind basically what, I forget who said this to us, but it's like, if we all can just agree that we're just going to print money and no one's going to call in the debts, then we're fine, right? Why do you, is this late stage capitalism, as our communist friends would say, or like, why do you think this is the path that the international intelligentsia seems to be following?
Well, these narratives develop, and I think a lot, it probably goes back to 08.
Yeah.
And that we didn't have the growth coming out of that we should have had. And we could have whole other podcast on that. But I think that has a lot to do with regulatory policy and a reaction to 08, blaming it on, it was a bunch of different people, a bunch of different entities to blame. And basically we just blamed the banks, and we decided to increase regulations on them. And I think that has a lot to do with it. And so like when you get the narrative like that, I think the left just seized on that, and that's where we are now.
Right.
And I don't know if you have any more theories on why you think it's like.
Yeah, I kind of think that we kind of got ourselves backed into a corner to a degree, right? When you're seeing the percentage of revenue that's going to debt repayment increasing every year, and then after this, it's like the whole departments are going to be less than the debt repayment on the loans, right? And this is at the lowest historical interest rates ever. So how do you get yourself out of this? You have to almost just basically turn around and say, we're going to change the whole way we think about money, right? Because that's really the
that's basically it. That's what they're
right. That's what they're trying to do, because otherwise they're up a creek without a paddle. Like how do you recover from this? I don't know. I don't think you can grow your way out of this.
Grow your way out of like the debt problem we have right now.
No, I don't think you can.
No, definitely. So like,
so what do you do? Right.
And look at Japan. They've been doing it since the early 90s, last 30 years.
Yeah.
And they've tried everything.
And they're stuck.
Get out of it.
They're stuck.
And that's why I always say I'm more concerned about us becoming Japan than Venezuela. Like I hear all the time there's differences between Canada and Japan, which are all true. We have immigration, they don't.
Yeah.
Stuff. I think we're probably more of an entrepreneurial culture than they are. Even like everything there is run by.
They're very corporatist.
Yeah, they're very corporatist.
And I don't mean that in the capitalist sense, but in the almost communist sense.
Basically, they're big corporations or employment agencies. Is basically what they are. Yeah. So like there's reasons why we wouldn't be Japan, but I think that's just as scary as Venezuela, because we start going down the road to hyperinflation. There's the political will here to get out of that. Like,
Right.
we went through that in the 70s. We know the playbook. I don't think we'd stand for it for very long.
No,
But
well, watching our wealth disappear like that?
Yeah, we would be pissed off,
Yeah.
and there would be a political reaction. But you start going towards Japan, and it's kind of like a frog in boiling water.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're doing all these fixes one after the other, and it's slow, and life's not that bad yet.
But it's not getting bad.
It might never get awful. But
right. But a whole generation of people is suddenly like giving up on life and just.
Yeah. You hear about the suicide rates there. That's an epidemic in and of itself. And you just muddle through, which I find a lot more scary, because you probably do as well. Just the feeling of being cut by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, the death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, death by 1,000 cuts. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, actually. I think stagnation is far worse than, because I think, obviously what's happening in Venezuela is absolutely terrible, and I don't want to diminish that.
Yeah.
But like what you said is, it comes down to your first principles and your values. And in your case, and our case, freedom is the number one value, right?
Yeah.
And the Japanese system reduces and reduces and reduces freedom. Not in a intentional way, but just in a institutional way. It has to, because it's trying to deal with this problem, this self-inflicted problem.
You're sacrificing your freedom for the greater good there.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not like, people never think of it that way, because they don't think of Japan as this basket case. You don't think of it as communist Russia or something like that, obviously. But that's basically what you're doing still, by trying to solve these problems, and you giving up more control of your life to solve these collective problems.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk to you about China and your view on China, and whether you think China is a real threat economically, or if it's more of a paper tiger.
So my view on China the last 4 years, I guess, I went from like ultra China duh to ultra China hawk.
Right. Okay. So you kind of went the opposite way of everyone else.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
And well, I think there has been an increase in Chinese and hawkishness towards China over the last.
Yes. Well, definitely.
Years.
Yeah.
But the reason I've done so is because I do believe we're in a cold war for them, for what the purpose of the state is, like, as we were talking about at the beginning of this discussion.
Yeah.
About whether the state is there to protect your life and create the structure for you to pursue your own ends, or if you live for the state like you do in China. Yeah. And people talk about like state capitalism, they call them, which I don't like that word either, but.
Right. Well, that's definitely a leftist word, right? They're trying to tie the capitalist system away from, like you said, the moral values. They're trying to tie to what's wrong with China, which they do have a higher degree of economic freedom than they used to, or the USSR did. But it's only when it suits. But they have even less political freedom, arguably. Yeah, they have less political freedom, and their economic freedom is only when it suits the CCP's purposes. Yes. Like, does Jack Ma have freedom? No, like wasn't he arrested recently? Yeah. He can't leave China with his family. Yeah. Like, and he doesn't have more freedom than like the poorest people in Canada or the US have. Yeah. Well, maybe not right now. Good, we're not allowed to leave our homes right now. Well, yeah, separate issue. But hey, here today we can start going and drinking inside again. Oh man! Thank you, our great overlords, for granting us this gift. Oh, Premier Kenny, if you didn't say we could go drink inside, what would we do? So I want to talk a little bit about your life, because in the Canadian story, where it's all about Canadians, in the sense of, tell us what it's like to be a trader, what you enjoy about it, the thrill of it, but also because you and I have talked a lot about the mental fortitude it takes to actually be good at trading, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of people have become more interested in trading. You've been trading for a long time, but I think over the last 4 or 5 years, it's become a much bigger thing, because we're in this bubble economy right now that we're in, or whatever. Why don't you share with the listeners kind of some of the psychological truths you've learned from trading, how it helps you learn about regulating emotion, and I would love if you'd share one of your favorite trade stories, because you have some pretty epic ones.
I like the word you use there, regulate emotion, because it's regulating it. It's not getting rid of your emotions.
No.
Because you can't make a decision without emotion.
No. Yeah, exactly. And in fact, if you don't have your gut, you're not going to pursue a thesis exactly.
Yeah, if you have conviction in something, that's an emotion.
Yeah, true. Good point.
Yeah. And there is research that you do have neurons going from your gut to your brain. So the whole idea of gut instinct isn't entirely wrong. It's just separating those emotions that mean something from those that don't. So it's like separating the signal from the noise.
Yes.
And so, like, there's a lot of academic research. Well, I wouldn't call it academic, but there's a lot of trading psychologists who've written about this, about just understanding your emotions and like knowing and just the finding which ones to express and not to express. Because when you talk out your emotion to yourself, you have a higher probability of figuring out which ones mean something and which ones don't. Like, just because you've missed a trade doesn't mean you should go trade it right now.
Right. The dynamics have now changed. That's the interesting thing about the market. It's continuously moving, right? And so you can't. And this, I think, is what bothers people so much, and why they say it's all random and it doesn't make any sense. And you can't make money in the market, and it's gambling, right? It's a casino, they say, right?
Yeah,
how often do you hear that? It's a casino, right?
You hear that a lot. Or that
what's your response to that?
Well, it depends what your definition of gambling is.
Right.
Like, I don't exactly view gambling as just random guessing and random bets. I think it is an intellectual pursuit. We're trying to make your best judgment, and you have a strategy behind it, and you pursue that. And sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, and you're trying to just make your winners larger than your losers. Like,
yes.
I should have the stats somewhere, but I probably 50% of the time I'm right on a trade, maybe even less than that.
Right.
Still able to make money.
Yeah.
Because my winners are larger than my losers. Like, even the best traders are 60%.
Yeah. Well, you and I have talked about this a lot. It's like a lot of people, if they lose, they will put more in to try to get back their loss.
Yeah.
But if they win, they try to hold on to their winnings. And that's the opposite of what you should be doing when you're trading. If you've got a winner, you should be riding that thing as hard as you can because you were right. And so why don't you share a little bit about that? Because that was one of my favorite conversations we've had about this. It's like, no, that's the completely wrong way of thinking about it. But because people have the scarcity mindset, right? They cling to what they can get. And then when they lose, they feel that emotion is more intense than winning, actually, which is the complete wrong way of going about it.
Yeah. The scarcity mindset's a good way to put it, because they're just trying to protect what they have instead of trying to
get more.
Pursue more. And what's the best way to put this? It's like people think that you got to take big risks to make money. Yeah. Which you do have to have a risk-seeking mindset. But like, the idea of taking small losses and actually increases your chances to make money, because you take that big hit, it's going to paralyze you.
Yeah.
Like, we've all been through that.
You're going to feel just you're just going to feel crushed.
When you take that big hit in trading, it's hard to get back in the saddle. Yeah. You should try to gain the mental fortitude to be able to do it. And if not, take a couple weeks off, because you're just going to piss money away.
Yeah.
But it, like, just swinging for the fences and taking big positions out of nowhere doesn't help you make money.
No.
Take big positions when you're making money.
Yes, exactly. That's when
you're
right
for the fences.
Yeah,
when you build up that cushion, and guys like George Soros and Stan Druckenmiller and Paul Tudor Jones all talk about this. They trade small to start, and whether that's at the beginning of the year or just a random interval, and when they build up that cushion, when they see the big bet, they make that big bet. Like, I'm sure most of your listeners will know the story about the pound devaluation.
Yeah. Well, why don't you share it? Some of them won't. This is a great story.
So back in the early 90s, there was the European rate mechanism. The pound and the Deutschmark were all tied together in a band. Right. And they don't need to go into it. They had this thesis of why the pound had to devalue versus the Deutschmark. So they already had a win on the year. They were up 15, 20%. And so Druckenmiller started putting on this position, and then Searles looks at them and says, "Why don't you have more on?
Right.
You're right. You need to be a pig."
Yeah.
We got the cushion to do it.
Let's
and
just
then they
do
went
it.
in heavy, and this was a case where they're buying Deutschmark, selling pounds, actually broke the Bank of England.
Yeah.
And they had this huge windfall, which you can read about in many different books.
Billions and billions of dollars
they made. It was a couple $1 billion, which was a lot at the time.
Well, and the interesting thing about that is, right, now there's a whole bunch of people who hate them for being right on that, and have conspiracy theories about them, being great evil.
There's a lot of conspiracy theories about George Soros.
So why don't you share one of your big, what it feels like? Because I think a lot of people don't understand when you're playing with those numbers, and it's not like you're playing with billions at this point.
No, I wish.
But share what it's like, because that is the best way for people to understand how this emotional regulation eventually forms, because you go through these moments, right?
What, you want a story?
Yeah.
Okay, I won't give numbers or anything, but in 2016, this was I had this thesis that I thought Brexit was going to happen.
Yeah.
And
I love this
morning
story.
of Brexit, I went short the S&P 500, and it rallied throughout the entire day, and then finally I just got stopped out. I was like, enough. I've given up 20 points. This is more than I wanted to give up. This was a stupid trade. And then we all know what happened that night. Brexit happened. S&P 500 limit down. I'm watching it the entire night, just mad at myself. I'm like counting the money I could have won.
Yeah.
But I couldn't pull the trigger again. And it felt horrible. So I take that lesson. And then November, it's the election night, November 8th. And the market rallies the entire day. I'm like, okay, I think Trump has a shot to win here. I think it's underrated. Everyone's pricing they couldn't win, but I'm not going to just short during the day and have this rally in my face the entire day.
Like I did last time.
like I did. What was that? 4 or 5 months ago. So that night, because futures trade 24/7, it pops, and then when it starts coming in, it starts dropping. So I'm like, okay, now's the time to pounce.
Yeah.
So then I went in full size, added. It went limit down, and then I covered. And I was actually talking to a friend on the phone at the time, and he's like, "Denton, you should buy now." And I'm like, "Oh no, but this might go down for a couple more days." And he's like, "The Democrats lost."
It's gonna go.
So at least I cover my position, but I should have went long with it.
Right.
And that's like a lesson of learning from your prior mistakes. And luckily I had the opportunity a few months later to do the exact same trade, basically.
Right. Yeah. And then you're like, oh, I've been here before. I've learned from my mistake. I was emotional last time. I love that. I think one of the things that I love most about trading, and I've had this 5 or 6 times with Tesla or GME and a few others, is that euphoria you get when you've built this thesis for a long time, right? You've been studying it. You've been putting your tons of effort into analyzing it, be like, is this true? Is my conviction just, confirmation bias, or is this a real thing? You want to share about kind of not your process, because we don't want to give away your, your secret sauce, but it's how do you handle it when you're watching the bank account jump huge, right? You're seeing the 10, 15, 20% win. A lot of people struggle with that more than they struggle with losing. Yeah, no, that's tough because your emotions start kicking in just as much as when you're losing. You start making bad decisions as well. Yeah, I usually just get up, take a walk, and do a big deep breath. Right. It sounds simplistic, but how else you're going to handle it? You're always going to have that euphoria when you're winning. Oh yeah. And if you didn't, why are you doing this? Yes. Yeah. If you didn't like winning anymore. If you didn't like it, if you're not competitive enough for that to get your juices going,
why are you doing it? And I'm more of the guy that I hate losing more than I like winning.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's the winner's spirit.
It's kind of like not to don't want to compare myself to the GOAT, but like Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
He hated losing more than he enjoyed winning.
Right. And that's going to help you avoid the big losses.
That's going to help you avoid the big losses and to keep at it. But at the same time, if you don't enjoy your wins, why the hell are you doing this?
Yeah. Like then you're just not having any fun at all. No, I agree.
And then there's this documentary with Paul Tudor Jones. It was on PBS in the 80s. And he called the 87 crash, right? But this was filmed prior to the 87 crash. And he's like, I would never give my money to someone who didn't have emotions. I would never give it to a robot.
Right.
And he thought he was right, ahead of his time, that you need emotions to trade.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think fundamentally you need emotions to trade?
Because the best guys, when like you're talking about having that thesis and seeing it develop, you need to, when it happens, you need to go.
Yeah.
There's no waiting. Like it's prudence and then it's aggressiveness.
Yeah.
So you're
it's like you have to shift.
You
have to shift.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you shift in the gear and you go and you jump on it. And if you don't have the emotions that you want to win and that you want that feeling of euphoria, which can also hurt you. As we talked about,
Yes.
and you're not going to go like that.
No. You're going to be safe and secure. And you're never going to...
You're going to be like, oh, I'll wait a bit. And every time you say, I'll wait a bit, when you know it's right, you effed up badly.
Yes. It destroys your personal mental confidence too, right?
Missing a trade's one thing. You can recover from missing a trade. But if you do it too much, it's going to eat at your mentality so much. And it's going to paralyze you just like losing paralyzes you.
Yes. It's knowing you're right about winning and not acting is actually just massively bad for your mental health in a sense.
It's like taking a loss.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And actually, those are the ones that people talk about the most. They don't talk about their big losses. They talk about the missed win. That was the one that you shared, right?
Yeah. And I do it more than others because I have, I'm trying to get tighter stops in my trades.
Right. Yeah.
I'm trying to maximize size, minimize risk.
Yes.
It's kind of my style. And so it does happen to me more often, which I just have to learn to live with.
Yeah. Right.
It does happen. So you do have to learn to live with it, but it is key to have that go gear. And the euphoria, I believe, is a big part of having that go gear.
Yeah, you have to love wins. It's actually like political campaigns in a lot of ways. Like you're always chasing the win.
Yeah.
You're chasing
if you don't want to win, why the hell are you doing it?
Yeah, exactly.
You're just some schmuck
who's just collecting a paycheck.
Yeah.
Well, we gotta close down here because we got another one coming up right away. But what's one thing you'd like to say about freedom and how we can preserve it here in Canada, and like a way that you think we can preserve the thing you love about this country?
So my view is that I'm more focused on the conservative movement and making sure that goes in the right direction, because as goes the conservative movement, so goes Canada. Yeah. Everything that we love about Canada or that we want to improve about Canada, because we know the NDP and the Liberals are never going to do what I want.
No.
So I'm a pragmatist about that I don't need to be perfect, but I at least want to be directionally right.
Yeah. No, I agree. We need to, and our movement needs a lot of work, I think, as we all.
We've talked about that. So that's a separate podcast.
Yeah, that's a separate podcast. Well, thank you for joining us, Denton, and good luck in the markets.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.